In the past, the government has said parts of the treaty will make for uncomfortable reading until the definitions are understood. It's a sea change, a major shift in Gibraltar's history, and will require realignment in many areas. Gibraltar is not joining the Schengen area. Immigration, policing and justice remain the responsibility of the Gibraltar authorities. The treaty includes measures to ensure a level playing field and a commitment on cooperation against money laundering, terrorist financing and tax evasion, as well as on climate change, labour and social standards, and on a number of other issues on security and safety. It includes provisions for consultation and arbitration. When a dispute raises a question of interpretation of union law, the Court of Justice of the European Union will give a final binding ruling on interpretation. The treaty does not specifically touch on sovereignty and is without prejudice to any party's position on it. Its two core pillars deal with the free circulation of people and goods and include the removal of the physical frontier with Spain. For this to work in practice, the Schengen authorities play a large role with exchange of information and cooperation at the heart of how it would work on the ground. The biggest visible and infrastructural changes will be at the airport and frontier. Enhanced use of the airport will allow for flights between Gibraltar and EU destinations. Spain will be kept informed of crew lists and passenger lists. Gibraltar residents of any nationality will not be able to be refused entry to Gibraltar and will not be subject to coercive controls by the Schengen authorities. Schengen controls for Gibraltarians and EU nationals would be carried out by automated border control systems, and there are no immigration controls on passengers on Schengen flights. Entry checks on third country nationals will be carried out by the Gibraltar authorities and then by Spain. Exit checks will be carried out by Spain and then by the Gibraltar authorities. Anyone refused entry at the airport by the Gibraltar authorities will be taken to the second-line checks area, where Spanish officials will review whether they're legally entitled to enter Schengen. Spain can also refuse entry to third country nationals who do not comply with the Schengen Borders Code. The individual will be given the option to be sent back. Spanish officials present at the airport outside the second-line checks area could be in uniform within the immigration booths. Spanish officials outside the immigration booths between checks areas could be in civilian clothes, but always identifiable. A Gibraltar-Spain joint venture company established in Ireland will grant the tender to the company that operates the civilian part of the airport in specific areas. Gibraltar Air Terminal Limited will continue to run operations as now. Circulation between Gibraltar and all EU member states will not require border checks. In exceptional circumstances where there's a serious threat to the public policy, public health or internal security, border controls can be reinstated. In terms of who's allowed to live in Gibraltar, EU citizens and third country EU residents can stay for 90 days in any 180 without requiring a visa. And Gibraltar residents can stay in any Schengen EU member state for 90 days in any 180 without requiring a visa. Gibraltar residents are exempt from wet stamping, the entry-exit system and the ETIAS. They also have the right to transit through Schengen EU member states even if they do not have the travel requirements to return home, unless they're on the national list of alert of that country and the alert is accompanied by instructions to refuse entry or transit. Short-stay visas for nationals of third countries who require them to visit Gibraltar will be issued by Spain. Gibraltar has a right to ask Spain to refuse a short-stay visa for Gibraltar on grounds of public policy, internal security or public health. Gibraltar will be responsible for issuing residence permits, often notifying the Spanish authorities. Spain can, however, refuse their issue if it deems them to constitute a threat to the Schengen states. The treaty includes a law enforcement and judicial cooperation framework, modelled on the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. It provides for intelligence sharing, operational cooperation between the Royal Gibraltar Police and Spanish law enforcement, and joint protocols for cross-border security, including joint patrols. A joint working group on police cooperation with members of the relevant authorities is established. An encrypted radio frequency will be set up as a designated communications channel. Communications can also take place via the station personnel in the joint facility colloquially known as the Schengen Shack. The authorities of each participant are allowed to perform continued surveillance in each other's jurisdiction, but this can only be done with prior notice. They will be allowed to carry weapons, but only use them in legitimate self-defence. They are not allowed to enter into private homes or areas not accessible to the public. Hot pursuits will follow the Schengen model. Schengen authorities in hot pursuit into Gibraltar will be able to inform the local authorities beforehand. The pursuing authorities must be identifiable and may carry their service weapons, which again they can only use in self-defence. They may keep the individual until the local authorities arrive, but not arrest them. The Gibraltar authorities will be responsible for the individual pursued and any vehicle involved. They would face the Gibraltar judicial system. This would work the same for Gibraltar authorities in hot pursuit into Spain. Gibraltar officials will always accompany Spanish officials in any joint operation on Gibraltarian soil. There have been concerns about security once the frontier comes down. The government is investing in new security infrastructure at the frontier: CCTV with live facial recognition, number plate recognition, full lighting, a tri-service joint operating base for the Borders and Coast Guard Agency, Customs and the RGP, and new 4x4 patrol vehicles. The treaty sets out the conditions for arrest warrants and extraditions, as well as for freezing and confiscation orders, and for the sharing of banking information when someone is suspected of criminality. There's an initial period of 4 years for evaluating how the Schengen parts of the treaty are working. All security arrangements are fully reciprocal. As part of the border surveillance and cooperation, joint maritime patrols will be carried out in jointly crewed law enforcement vessels. The patrols will happen on neutrally branded vessels with a European flag or similar visible insignia to show they're performing a Schengen border surveillance function. The vessels will be provided by the two parties on an alternate weekly basis. Arrests during the surveillance will be carried out by the competent authorities of the jurisdiction where the person was arrested and in accordance with its laws. The treaty establishes a cooperation council with both EU and UK representatives in respect of Gibraltar. It will be co-chaired by a member of the European Commission and a UK minister. This referee council will supervise and facilitate the application and implementation of the agreement and of any new ones that may arise. There will also be Schengen evaluations and joint visits. The treaty establishes 3 specialised committees with representatives from the EU and the UK. They will deal with circulation of persons, economy and trade and aviation. The treaty creates a customs union between the UK and the EU in respect of Gibraltar. Gibraltar is not joining the EU customs territory. It's entering into a bespoke arrangement that enables the free circulation of goods between Gibraltar and the EU without customs checks at the land frontier. The current import duty regime will be replaced by a new transaction tax, charged on importation, up to 17% in the next 3 years. After 3 years, the rate can be revisited, never more than 2 percentage points below the lower standard of VAT in any member state. Gibraltar's traders will be able to access the EU customs union market. They will be able to sell to customers across the EU, and EU consumers will be able to buy from Gibraltar without customs barriers. All goods sold on the Rock must be EU compliant. Union goods arriving at Gibraltar by sea will be customs cleared in Algeciras. Spain will carry out customs clearance for goods from non-EU countries destined for Gibraltar at designated customs posts in La Línea, Algeciras and Sagunto in Valencia. A subsidiary designated customs post will be designated in Portugal. The money collected will be returned to Gibraltar. However, by way of collection costs, Spain will keep a percentage of the import duties collected in accordance with the EU's applicable retention rate. After a 3-year transition, the allowance system for individuals will disappear entirely. They'll be able to travel between Gibraltar and the EU with any quantity of goods for personal use with no restrictions, the same rules that apply between EU member states. An independent consultative body will assess whether the new arrangements are creating distortions in either direction. There will also be an exchange of information to combat tobacco smuggling, including identifying individuals. A tobacco traceability system will be set up in keeping with EU law. Traceability information on the movement of tobacco products in Gibraltar will be shared with Spain. Monitoring mechanisms to exchange information with the EU competent authorities on tobacco products entering or leaving Gibraltar will be established. Additional measures such as picture warnings on packaging, the banning of tobacco for oral use, and cross-border distance sales will be adopted. Confiscated tobacco will be disposed of. Transport operations and road haulage operators will require a licence when operating within the EU. The treaty details the requirements and obligations and the infringements that could lead to its revocation. In the EU member states would issue the licences. The transport of goods within the contiguous frontier zone, the Campo de Gibraltar, will be possible. Gibraltar driving licences will be recognised in that area. Emergency ambulances and those dealing with serious medical cases can transfer patients beyond the Campo to listed establishments in Spain. The treaty enshrines the rights of frontier workers with EU law replicated in this respect. Family members will enjoy a right to equal treatment in the access to social and tax advantages. Frontier workers made redundant will be entitled to unemployment benefits from the jurisdiction they were made redundant in. But as a frontier worker, you will have no access to social housing, as you will lose the frontier worker status. Gibraltarians posted to Spain within the Campo for a limited period may be allowed to work there. This is also reciprocal. Both parties shall provide funding to promote cohesion between Gibraltar and this contiguous frontier zone. It would be used for matters such as training and employment. The operational autonomy of the UK's military facilities in Gibraltar is preserved. UK military personnel entering Gibraltar will not be subject to Schengen passport checks. The posting of military personnel and their families will not depend on Schengen border controls. The UK will continue to decide who serves in Gibraltar, but Spain will need to be advised of their identity. They will not acquire any right to permanent residence or domicile in the Schengen area. Any military family member refused a residence permit by Spain will have a right to a residence permit issued by Gibraltar, but limited to Gibraltar. Military aspects of the airport entirely out of scope. RAF Gibraltar is unaffected. Under the treaty, Spain imposes authorisation requirements and will assess and grant licence applications for the transfer of defence military equipment, items on the common military list of the European Union, destined for the armed forces, the police or public authorities. The agreement can be terminated in whole or in part if either party considers there's been a serious and substantial breach in the treaty's obligations. Before this happens, the Cooperation Council must meet with a view of seeking a timely and mutually agreeable solution. It has 30 days in which to do this. A serious or substantial breach would have to be exceptional, threatening peace and security, or one that carries international repercussions. The agreement can also be terminated by written notification through diplomatic channels and would cease to be in force a year after notification. Furthermore, should Spain ask for its termination because of an adverse evaluation of the Schengen aspects of the treaty, the EU would comply. Parties can also ask to be temporarily released from treaty obligations. This would happen a week after notification, when border controls between Gibraltar and the EU would be reinstated. The UK and Gibraltar would have its own separate legal agreement.